The drive from my place in Macon to my son-in-law's house in Savannah used to take me exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. I know that because I made that drive every single Sunday for almost 2 years. I had it memorized. The exit off I-16, the left turn past the Dollar General, the way the oak trees on his street hung so low over the road that my truck cap barely cleared them in summer. I made that drive because my daughter was gone, and her little girl still needed her grandfather. That's what I told myself anyway. That's the story I held on to every Sunday morning when I loaded up the cooler with groceries and folded $500 in cash into the front pocket of my flannel shirt. I did it for Lily. I did it because my daughter would have wanted me to. I did it because when you lose the person who was your whole heart for 31 years, you hold on to whatever pieces of her are still in the world. Her name was Megan. She had her mother's eyes and my stubborn streak, and she laughed loud enough to embarrass everyone in a restaurant. She died in February, 2 years before any of this. Or so I thought. Pancreatic cancer, they said, fast-moving. By the time she was diagnosed, it was already stage 4. I drove up to Savannah the day her husband Troy called me. I sat by her bed in that hospital room and held her hand, and I told her things a father tells his daughter when he's terrified that time is running out. And then she got worse. And then Troy started handling everything. Doctor visits, medications, decisions. He said it was easier that way. He said she didn't want me seeing her in that condition, that she was proud, that she hated being seen as weak. I believed him because she was proud. That part was true. I wasn't there when she passed. Troy called me at 5:47 in the morning. I still have that timestamp in my phone, the way you remember certain numbers for no good reason. He said it happened overnight. Peaceful, he said. I drove to Savannah in the dark and helped plan a funeral and stood at a graveside in Bonaventure Cemetery in the cold February wind, and I scattered wildflower seeds into the dirt because Megan always said she wanted wildflowers, not a stone. And then I went home to Macon, and I sat in my house alone. And I tried to figure out how to keep breathing. Troy had a daughter to raise. Lily was 6 years old when Megan died. Dark-haired, serious, with a habit of tilting her head when she was thinking that reminded me so much of Megan at that age that the first time I saw it after the funeral, I had to walk out of the room. So nobody saw me fall apart. Troy worked construction, long hours, irregular pay. I offered to help. I wasn't a rich man. I was retired from the Georgia Department of Transportation, living on a pension and Social Security. But I'd been careful my whole life, and I had savings. $500 a week, I told him. For Lily. For groceries, school supplies, whatever she needed. He said he couldn't accept it. I said, try and stop me. He laughed. We had a decent relationship, Troy and I. He wasn't the man I would have picked for Megan. He was quiet in a way that felt more like closed than calm. But he'd treated her well enough, as far as I saw. And he was Lily's father. That was what mattered. Every Sunday I brought the cash and a cooler of food, and I'd sit on their back porch while Lily showed me whatever she'd been drawing that week. She was obsessed with drawing horses. Hundreds of them, in every color, with names written underneath in her careful child's handwriting. Sometimes Troy would sit with us. Sometimes he'd say he had to get something from the hardware store, and he'd be gone the whole afternoon. I didn't think much of it. The Sundays blurred together the way grief does when you're moving through it without really processing it. Summer became fall, fall became another winter. Lily started 2nd grade. I bought her a backpack with a horse on it. Troy mentioned once that the water heater had gone out, and I wrote him a check for the replacement without blinking. Another time, the truck needed repairs. I helped. That's what family does. Or that's what I believed family did. It was a Tuesday in March when everything changed. Not a Sunday, a regular Tuesday afternoon that I happened to be passing through Savannah on my way back from a job site where I'd been consulting. They still called me in sometimes for bridge inspection work. I had Lily's birthday coming up, and I remembered passing a particular toy store on Waters Avenue, the old-fashioned kind, the kind Megan used to love as a kid. I thought I'd stop and pick something up. I was walking back to my truck, a wrapped box tucked under my arm, when I passed the Rite Aid on the corner. There was a woman at the drive-through pharmacy window. She was in the passenger seat of a white Honda I didn't recognize, window rolled down, arm extended to take a white paper bag from the pharmacist. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was laughing at something the pharmacist said. I was 20 feet away. I froze on the sidewalk. I knew that laugh. I had heard that laugh at every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday dinner for 31 years. I had heard that laugh in hospital waiting rooms and in the front seat of my truck on long road trips, and I had heard it one last time, muffled and exhausted, in a hospital room in Savannah before she stopped being herself. I told myself I was wrong. I stood there on the sidewalk like a man who'd been hit over the head, and I told myself it was someone who looked like her. The hair was similar. The laugh carried across parking lots. I was 63 years old, and I was grieving, and I was seeing things. The Honda pulled away before I could take 3 steps. I stood there for a long time. Then I went to my truck and sat in it with the engine off. My hands were shaking. I went home. I told myself I'd imagined it. I went to bed. I lay there in the dark, and I told myself 100 times that it wasn't her. But I couldn't sleep. I'm not a man who does things impulsively. I spent 30 years in civil engineering, inspecting infrastructure, identifying stress fractures and structural failures before they became disasters. I was trained to look for inconsistencies. I was trained to trust the evidence, even when the evidence told you something you didn't want to hear. The next morning, I drove back to Savannah. I didn't go to Troy's house. I drove to Bonaventure Cemetery, to the section where we'd buried Megan, and I stood in front of the headstone with her name on it, and I looked at it for a long time. The wildflowers had come up. They were overgrown now, a little ragged. I knelt down and I looked at the ground. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof that she was there, or proof that she wasn't. I drove to the county records office on Bull Street. I asked for the death certificate. The clerk was a young woman with reading glasses on a chain, and she looked up the name and pulled the file and set it on the counter. I opened it. The cause of death listed was pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The attending physician's name was Dr. Franklin Webb at Memorial Health in Savannah. Date of death, February 14th. The certificate had been signed and filed correctly. I wrote down Dr. Webb's name. That afternoon I called Memorial Health and asked for Dr. Franklin Webb. The receptionist put me on hold for 4 minutes. Then she came back and told me there was no physician by that name on staff, current or former. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking garage, and I read that name off the death certificate 3 more times. I drove to Troy's house. It was a Wednesday, mid-afternoon. Troy's truck wasn't in the driveway. Lily would still be at school. I sat across the street for a while, just watching. The house looked the same. The oak tree in the front yard had a rope swing on it that I'd put up myself 2 summers ago. There was a ceramic pot of petunias by the front door that hadn't been there the last time I visited. I didn't know why that bothered me. But it did. I went home. I did not call Troy. I did not confront anyone. I went back to Macon and I called my brother Clint, who retired from the Bibb County Sheriff's Office 3 years ago, and I told him what I'd seen and what I'd found. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, "Okay, don't touch anything yet. Let me make some calls." Clint had contacts everywhere. He knew a retired detective in Chatham County named Burl who did private investigative work on the side. He made the introduction. I hired Burl the following morning. I want to be honest about the next 3 weeks because they are the part of this story I have the hardest time telling. Not because I'm ashamed of what I did. I'm not. But because every day of those 3 weeks was its own kind of grief. Not the grief of losing someone. The grief of finding out the loss was manufactured. Those are 2 entirely different kinds of pain, and I'm still not sure which one is worse. Burl was methodical. He established that the white Honda was registered to a woman named Candace, 38 years old, with a Tybee Island address. Within 4 days he had connected Candace to Troy. They'd been together for at least 18 months, possibly longer. They were careful, but not careful enough. Credit card records, a shared gym membership, a lease agreement co-signed 6 months after Megan's supposed death. Burl then tracked down Dr. Franklin Webb. He wasn't a physician. He was a notary public in Pooler, Georgia, with a side business that Burl described to me over the phone in a flat, careful voice as document preparation services. He had a prior complaint filed against him in 2019 for producing fraudulent employment verification letters. Nothing had come of it. The death certificate was a forgery. I sat in my kitchen in Macon, and I held the phone and I looked out the window at my backyard, where I had built a swing set for Lily, thinking she'd spend summers here with me, and I tried to process the information. My daughter was alive. My daughter was alive, and she had let me believe she was dead. She had let me grieve her. She had let me scatter wildflower seeds into an empty grave while she was somewhere, living some other life, probably with Candace's help or knowledge, probably planning to start over somewhere new. She had been receiving money from me every Sunday, money I gave to Troy, money he passed to her, or spent on their shared life, or some combination I still don't fully understand. For almost 2 years, I asked Burl where she was living. He said she had an apartment in Brunswick, about an hour south. He gave me the address. I did not go there. I called Clint again. I told him everything. He said, "This is fraud, potentially wire fraud if any of this crossed state lines. And depending on how that death certificate was filed, it's a federal matter." He said I needed to talk to an attorney before I did anything else. I found an attorney in Savannah, a woman named Patricia Hughes who specialized in estate law and had handled fraud cases before. I drove to her office on a Friday morning with every document I had, copies of the death certificate, the records Burl had gathered, 2 years of bank records showing the Sunday cash transfers. She looked at everything carefully. She asked several questions. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "The fraudulent death certificate alone is a felony. The ongoing financial deception compounds it significantly. Do you want to pursue this through law enforcement or civil channels, or both?" I said, "I want my granddaughter." She nodded like she'd expected exactly that answer. What I learned in the next several days was that Lily was, for all legal purposes, in the primary custody of her father. Megan, being legally dead, had no custody status. But Megan's legal death had been obtained fraudulently. Once that was unwound, the entire situation changed. Patricia filed a report with the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. Burl provided his documentation. Within the week, there were investigators involved who were not private ones. I did not contact Troy. I did not contact Megan. I went to Savannah that Sunday, as I had every Sunday for 2 years, with the cooler, with the cash. I sat on Troy's back porch with Lily, and I watched her show me 8 new horse drawings, and I gave them all the attention they deserved. She'd started giving them last names. There was one named Starfire Holbrook that she was particularly proud of. I told her Starfire Holbrook was the finest horse I'd ever seen in any medium. Troy sat with us for part of the afternoon. He seemed relaxed. He had no idea. I drove home that night and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The following Thursday, Troy was arrested at a construction site in Garden City on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. A separate warrant was issued for Megan. The address in Brunswick that Burl had found was correct. She was taken into custody there. I found out about the arrest through Clint, who got a call from a contact of the DA's office. He called me at 7:15 in the morning. I was already awake. He said, "It's done." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "What about Lily?" Lily was placed with me as her nearest available family while the legal process sorted itself out. Patricia had prepared for this. There was documentation, there was a home study, there was everything that needed to be there. A social worker drove Lily to my house in Macon on a Friday afternoon with a backpack and a rolling suitcase covered in horse stickers. She stood in my doorway looking up at me with her mother's eyes, and she said, "Grandpa, are you going to be okay?" I crouched down so we were at eye level, and I said, "I'm working on it." "Are you?" She thought about it seriously. She said, "I think so." I set her up in the room that had been Megan's, which I'd kept mostly the same since Megan left home at 18. Lily put her horse drawings on the dresser without being asked. I won't try to describe what the legal process looked like over the next several months, because that story is long and complicated and still not entirely finished. What I can tell you is that the forgery charges against both Troy and Megan were serious. The DA pursued them. There were plea negotiations. There were hearings. There was a period of several weeks when I was required to give testimony about the financial transfers, all of it every Sunday, every $500, the cooler of groceries, the check for the water heater, the truck repairs. All of it laid out in a conference room under fluorescent lights. At one point, through attorneys, Megan requested to speak with me. I said no. I thought about it for a long time before I said it, but I said no. She had made a choice. She had looked at her life, at her marriage, at her circumstances, at whatever she could not bring herself to face directly. And she had chosen a deception so profound and so cruel that I still, even now, cannot fully reach the bottom of it. She had chosen to let me believe my child was dead. She had let me grieve her into the ground. She had let me sit by an empty grave and scatter wildflower seeds. Whatever she needed to tell me, she could tell it to a judge first. Lily started 3rd grade in Macon in September. She found a riding stable 20 minutes from the house, and on Saturday mornings I drive her out there and watch her learn to handle a real horse for the first time. She is fearless about it in a way that steals my breath. She leans forward over the horse's neck, and her whole face opens up, and for a moment she looks so much like her mother at the best moments that I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Usually I do both. Quietly, where she can't see. There's a thing that happens when you've been deceived by someone you love, when the deception was deep enough and long enough to reshape your entire understanding of what was real. You start to review everything. Every memory becomes a question. Every kind moment has a shadow behind it now. I think about all the Sundays I drove that road from Macon to Savannah, and I try to figure out what was real and what was performance, and I don't always know where the line was. What I do know is this. I was so afraid of losing her that I didn't ask questions I should have asked. I didn't push to be in that hospital room more. I accepted Troy's explanations too easily because accepting them was less painful than doubting them. I let my love for her become something that could be used against me. That's not her fault. That's mine. I'm not sure forgiveness is something I'm ready to offer. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But I know that Lily is in the next room right now drawing a horse named Copper Ridge who, according to her, has won 17 championships and has a very complicated rivalry with Starfire Holbrook. I know that she ate 2 plates of the chicken and dumplings I made for dinner. I know that she kissed me on the cheek before she went to her room and said, "Good night, Grandpa," in the same easy way she's been saying it since she was old enough to talk. I know that I didn't ask for this life, but I know that this little girl is the best part of what's left. Some nights I drive out to the edge of Macon and park by the old railroad overpass where I used to take McGann fishing when she was Lily's age. I sit and watch the water in the dark and I try to understand how we got here. I don't always get very far with it, but I keep showing up. For Lily, for the Saturday mornings at the stable, for the chicken and dumplings and the horse drawings and the good nights. Showing up is the thing I know how to do. Even when everything else goes wrong, you keep showing up. That's all I've got. And most days, it's enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with all of this. Long nights in a quiet house, just the ceiling fan and whatever's left of my thoughts. And the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the anger. Though the anger was real and it lasted a long time. It's the question of how I let it go so far. I'm an engineer by trade. Spent 30 years looking at bridges and overpasses and asking one simple question. Where is the stress point? Where is the thing that looks solid but isn't? I was good at it. I caught things other people missed. And yet I sat across from Troy every Sunday for nearly 2 years, handed him $500, watched him pour me a glass of iced tea, and I never once asked the hard question. I think I know why. When we love someone, we make a deal with ourselves. We decide that the cost of doubt is higher than the cost of being wrong. I couldn't afford to doubt Megan's death, because if I doubted it, I'd have to sit with the alternative, and the alternative was something my mind wouldn't go near. So I kept driving. I kept the cooler stocked. I kept telling myself I was doing it for Lily, and that part was true. But the rest of it, the not asking, the not pushing, the accepting, every closed door Troy put in front of me, that was me protecting myself from a truth I couldn't face. That's not love. That's fear, wearing love's clothes. What Troy and Megan did was wrong. There's no version of this story where it isn't. They took something real, my grief, my care for that little girl, my need to still be useful to someone I'd lost, and they turned it into a transaction. 2 years of Sundays, 2 years of a man driving 2 hours each way because he believed his granddaughter needed him. They knew what they were doing, and they kept doing it. Actions like that don't stay contained. They spread. They poisoned Lily's childhood, poisoned Troy's own life, poisoned whatever Megan was trying to build in Brunswick with her fresh start and her white Honda. You cannot construct a life on that foundation and have it hold. I know that the way I know a bridge with a compromised support beam will eventually fail, not if, only when. But here's the thing about cause and effect that I've had to learn the hard way. It doesn't only apply to the people who did wrong. It applies to me too. My choices had consequences. My willingness to look away had a cost. Part of what I carry now is the knowledge that wisdom isn't something you get handed. You earn it, usually by failing to use it when it mattered most. What I'm trying to pass on to Lily isn't a story about what her parents did. She'll understand that in her own time, in her own way. What I'm trying to show her every Saturday at that stable, every dinner, every ordinary Tuesday, is that you get up. You stay honest. You ask the hard questions even when the answers scare you, because the truth, however painful, is always more survivable than a comfortable lie. She's 8 years old and she already knows more about loss than most adults. But she's also fearless on that horse. She leans forward and she trusts herself, and she doesn't flinch. I watch her and I think that's the thing worth protecting. That specific kind of courage. The kind that doesn't come from never being hurt, but from deciding the hurt doesn't come the last word. I'm still working on that myself. Some days I'm better at it than others, but I show up. That part I've got done.